Alrighty, welcome back everybody to the 11th week of the JavaScript Tech Bytes session. If you are new coming in from the web development course, welcome back to the third week of this web development course where we are learning so many more advanced and amazing topics relating to the programming language of JavaScript. And if you have been with us from way back in the start of June, we have learned a ton of concepts and are now making our way towards making a project, that being Jeopardy, which we'll be diving into more today, along with learning some awesome concepts. So without any further ado, guys, let's get started. In case you don't already know who I am, guys, as most of you guys do, my name is Rayan Siddiqui. I'm a senior now at James V. Conant High School. Truly crazy how time flies. I love to program. I've made multiple apps for the App Store, made a dozen different websites, and I'm now really looking towards content producing, whether that be on YouTube channels and writing my own articles. If you want to learn more about me, feel free to check out my website at rayansiddiqui.com. All right, so let's get down to today's agenda and what we will be doing today. So firstly, if you remember last Wednesday, we started a new tradition in this course, that being the daily fun fact, in which we relate our programming language, which we are learning, in this case, that being JavaScript, to a relatable fact. So last week's was talking about the whole SpaceX launch and how the spaceship was sent Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley to the International Space Station, use the language we're studying, that being JavaScript. Today's going to be a nice and pretty interesting fact as well. Then we'll get into a new term, nothing too crazy like we've done in the past with maybe a list or a loop. It's a pretty simple term. We have actually learned it previously in Python. I believe we just did not cover it as well in depth in the JavaScript session, so we will be doing that today as well. And then we'll get to the fun part. We will continue working on our Jeopardy game, adding that JavaScript so that our game has some nice functionality. So yeah, let's get started. All right, so let's start off with the cool, fun fact about JavaScript of the week. Now, here's today's fun fact, guys. That being that the programming language JavaScript, which we are studying and making awesome projects of, was initially just developed in 10 days. Now, if we just think about that, this is a language which has so much functionality. It can make various websites. We made so many projects ourselves. To think that all of this whole language was made in 10 days by a man named Brandon Eek, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, that is truly crazy. Now, JavaScript was not just recently created. It's been I think it's been 2 decades almost now since the programming language JavaScript has been around. But initially, the language was just called LiveScript. Now, that might not have any significance to you. Initially, it was also called Mocha, but it later changed to be called JavaScript. Now, if you've ever heard of programming languages in the past, you might have heard of me, and then way back when me and Andrew used to do this together, we talked about some other languages, that being Java. Now, Java and JavaScript are 2 completely different programming languages. They are totally not related, at least in what we will be studying. Java is a much different language, much more picky, by the way, and how we write our syntax. JavaScript is pretty nice and being able to start off similarly like Python. But you might wonder, then why does the word Java exist in the word JavaScript? This is kind of weird. Well, back then, there wasn't that in the mid-1990s, I believe, when JavaScript was made. There wasn't that much opportunity to really promote whatever you're doing. I mean, look at today's world now. There's obviously outlets such as social media. There's so many ways you can communicate to others, but back then, it was definitely a bit harder. And when Brandon Eek first wrote JavaScript, they changed the name to JavaScript because the programming language Java was super popular. So he's like, hey, let me just add the word script to the end, and voila, we got JavaScript. He's getting some free advertising because his programming language is being compared to Java. People are wondering, why is the word Java, this language, inside of another language? Well, in reality, they are not related. So guys, this language, which was just created in 10 days, and that is, although it was initially made in 10 days, there has been a lot of improvements made by the company which takes care of the language and the whole scripting process, which is why it is such a nice language to work with today. And it is the main driving factor why over 1.6 billion websites are made in today's world, and 95% of them are made using the language we're studying, JavaScript. So guys, the limits, there are truly no limits when it comes to computer programming. We can truly do anything you like, make anything you want in whatever time frame you wanted to, which is the awesome thing which we have been learning over almost the past 3 months now. And yeah, hopefully you've been enjoying. So let's get to today's new terminology. Now, if you remember from our Python course, the Intro to Programming course, or if you've been here from way back in June, the Python course in general, we talked about global and local variables, and we're going to be talking about them today in JavaScript as we will be using them today in our Jeopardy game. Now, the concept, as we always iterate, guys, the concept is the same. The only thing which is going to differ in the language of JavaScript is how we actually just write the variables. Now, we already know from way back how to write variables, simply var, the name of our variable, and then we set it equal to whatever we want, whether that be a number, that be a word within some strings. Now, remember, if you don't remember what the difference between global and local variables is, that is totally fine. Remember, if we look to our left or right here, global variables, such as the variable x, this variable can be accessed everywhere inside of our program, in our JavaScript file. However, if you take a look at our variable y, which is inside of this function called initiate, this variable y can only be accessed, changed, manipulated, whatever we want to do with the variable inside of this function. So hence the name global variable. Global is x because it can be accessed everywhere. And in this case, local is the variable y because it can only be accessed inside of our function. So today, we will definitely be putting that into use with our Jeopardy program when we are going to be typing up the JavaScript and asking questions and all of that good stuff. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat, guys, and we will be putting this concept into actual syntax practice in a little bit. All right, so let's get to today's fun part of the day, that being continuing to create our Jeopardy game. Now, this is a multi-week project. If you are at all confused as to why are we creating Jeopardy or we're continuing it, well, you can always find what we did previously on last week's video, and that video can be found under the Schaumburg Libraries YouTube channel. Otherwise, if you have not already joined our Google Classroom, be sure to do such because that is where I post all the links to the code we do, along with the YouTube video link and a daily concept review, which is a nice refresher if you ever get confused. But anyway, let's talk about what we're going to be doing today. So last week, we made our basic HTML in the last 10 minutes. We made the button layout, we added the values for how much a question will be worth, but we really didn't get into any JavaScript and actually adding that interaction between the user and the computer. Well, today, that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be adding a lot more JavaScript functionality in the terms that we're going to ask the user a question within that category. We will evaluate the user's response using logic statements, if else. We will award the user whatever amount of points they earn, whether that be $100, $250, keep track of that and keep displaying that as well. And then we will disable that question from being clicked in the future just to make sure that you don't answer the same question multiple times. So guys, with that in mind, let's open up our coding website for JavaScript. Remember, it is jsfatal.net. I will also drop the link in the chat if you are new. So once you are on the website, guys, just let me know. I am actually going to be opening up our last week's example because this is where we were coding. I have also mentioned in the past that I highly recommend that you make a JSFiddle account because it's pretty useful in our Tech Bytes course in being able to save. You can ask me questions, send me a link through our Google Classroom that for any questions. So I would definitely recommend going to the making a JSFiddle account. And if you have not, that is totally fine. If you head on over to our Tech Bytes Google Classroom, head on over to the classwork area. Then we go to the week 10 Tech Bytes recap under the JavaScript folder. And then I have linked our fiddle, that being the Jeopardy fiddle. You can simply click on that. I will drop this one in the chat as well if you do not have a saved copy. All right, let's give guys a quick minute. Alrighty, so let's get started. So from last week, guys, a quick recap. What we got, we have all of these buttons. Now, we must say that these buttons are not looking that nice right now because we have not added any CSS. But if you want a sneak peek for what we're doing next week, we will be making our game look much nicer. But not this week. This week is just focused on the JavaScript aspect and adding that functionality to our game. And next week will be the styling part of it. But for this week, let's get started, guys, by how about adding that user interaction? So when I click a $100 question, I am asked a question. But before we can do that, we have to think about our 4 categories. So what are we feeling? Let me get a general synopsis from the comments, the chat section. What do we want to make 4 of the categories? If you like, how about you type 1 category, and then we can incorporate that into our game. So in the chat, just let me know, what do you want one of the categories to be? Like, it could be sports, video games, whatever we want. Anybody have any preferences? All right, then I guess we can go with some general categories. That being, we can do 1 category about, we'll do NBA basketball. The other category we can do about current events. The other one can be about NFL. The NFL, and the last category can be about, let's see, we got something in the chat. Ooh, Lord of the Rings. Okay, so I must say I have not read or watched Lord of the Rings, but we can definitely go with it, and well, I'll get some input from you then about any questions, any answers. Yeah. I guess I should read it now. I know how to think about it. So, guys, we got our 4 categories. So if we just imagine for this week that this first category represents NBA, second category represents current events, third one represents the NFL, and the fourth column represents Lord of the Rings. So let's get started. Now, how about we first get off started by creating a function? Now, this function is we want to pass the value of whatever our button is worth as a parameter. Remember, a parameter is a value which we can pass into a function so that we know how much points a question is worth. So how about we make a function called question clicked, and the parameters, there are going to be 2 parameters here because one of the parameters is going to represent the category of which the button pertains to, and the second parameter will be the value of the button. So with those open and close parentheses, let's add a open and close squiggly bracket. Now, just for syntax looking nice purposes, I'm going to store my parameters into a variable. So I'm going to declare var button category is going to be the category parameter, and then the button value is going to represent the value parameter. All right, so we got that. Now we actually have to link our buttons to our JavaScript. Remember how we can do that? Well, yep, if you guessed the onClick method, you are correct. So simply what we do is go before the end of our greater than sign, just do a space on click like such with the capital C equals. Now we're calling the function, which whatever you call it right here, I called mine function click. Just gonna paste that right there. We need the open and close parentheses, but we can't stop there because we are passing in 2 parameters. Well, we have to pass those 2 parameters in here. Now in this case, this is pretty static and everything is in one area. We can just say what the category is and the value and the amount of money the question represents. So in quotation marks, I'm just going to type right here NBA, comma, quick second, guys. All right, like such, the NBA, to represent that we are passing the value of the NBA category. And since this first button is worth $100, I will pass in 100. So now if we run this, and what we can do to make sure that our function is working correctly is that we can simply log the two buttons, the two values, so button category, and then we can log the button's value to make sure that all is working well. So if I hit this first button, we go to the log, we see the NBA, and then we see 100 being passed in. As always, guys, when I'm going through this, if you have any questions, want me to slow down, just feel free to drop in the chat. All right, so now is a bit of some copy and pasting time. We have to copy this on click line till the end of the quotation mark, and we got to paste in all of these buttons so that all of them are attached to this one button. In a sense, we are abstracting, but we're sort of balancing it out because we're copy and pasting a lot into our on-click methods. But this way, we have two parameters, and we can take care of all the button clicks with our one function. So how about we go ahead and do that? So what I'm going to do is simply go to my on-click like such, just change the category. So we said our second category would be current events. The third button is going to be worth the NFL. The fourth button is going to be about Lord of the Rings. And now just for some quick purposes, I'm just going to copy and paste this and change it up. If you guys would like, I can drop this fiddle right now in the chat so you can follow along. Let me know if that would be useful. Or if you'd like, you can totally do it by yourself as well. Just go ahead and change the HTML and the value of the buttons. Just changing the values, guys, of the parameter we are passing in so that we can correctly add the points to whenever the user gets the question right. And then one last category, that being the $1,000 buttons. All right, so I'll give everybody a quick couple of minutes to catch up. I will also, for today's class, since this is a lot of manipulating the HTML along with our JavaScript, I will drop the link to my fiddle below so that you can follow along in the chat. And once you are ready, just let me know in the chat. Is everybody good to go? Yep. We can wait. All right, awesome. We'll just wait one more minute just to make sure everybody's on the same page, and then we can get started by actually asking the user a question. Alrighty, so how about we start continuing, guys? So we have our buttons linked to an actual JavaScript function which will evaluate our user's response. But if with the past we've used alerts in many projects, but since we're trying to make this a bit nicer, how about we use the DOM, if you remember what that is, the document object model, in order to manipulate our HTML and display our question somewhere on this web page. So how about we go back to our HTML. I have these 2 lines copied. Just going to paste them right here, which will create a text field and then a submit button for the user's answer, like such. So if you are at all confused, that was a lot of code I just pasted right there. So input, lesson sign input, the type is text because we are going to be entering a text value. The ID, it can be whatever. This is what we're going to use to grab the input of the user, and then a button, which we'll call a submit button, submit function right there. Everybody, quick minute to catch up right there. So while everybody is typing that out, I'm just going to show an example of this working. So if I have my function called submit, because that is what I called it in the on click, and then I'll just alert the alert hello so that we can see the buttons working, and I hit submit, and voila. All right, so now we have a way for the user to answer the answer to the question, but we still don't have the ID to display the actual question. So let's go ahead and do that. So how about we head on back to the top of our HTML. We'll create a nice and bold H3 tag. This, if you remember, this is an H3 tag, meaning it's a header third tag, so it's going to be pretty big. And if I just type something in right here, no, not 33, like such, that's pretty big. That is where we will display our question. So we got our H3 tag. I'm going to give it an ID so that I can manipulate the content of this H3 tag. I'm just going to call it question display so that our question can be displayed right there. And since we are setting up more and more of our HTML, how about we go ahead and add another tag to the bottom of the text input for some type of response from the computer, such as you were right, you were wrong, and then a area for the user's amount of money they have. How about that, right? So we can make I'll make a H4 tag. I'm going to give it an ID of user feedback, because that is what we would tell the user if it's right or wrong, the answer they put in. And then lastly, I will make one last H4 tag. Now this H4 tag, guys, will be, oh, looks like 1 second. One more H4 tag, which will hold the user score. So I'm just going to give it an ID of user score. There we go. So now we got all of our HTML ready, even with some additional DOM elements, so that we can, number 1, display the question. Number 2, give the user feedback on if the answer they put in was right or wrong. And then finally, another ID tag where we can display how many points, how much money in this case the user has. All right, so with that out of the way, how about we get back down to our JavaScript? So we have our buttons connected, and we are passing in what type of category is and what question there is. But if you see I'm clicking, nothing is happening, well, that's because we're not actually using any logic to evaluate what type of question to ask the user. So now we have a couple of different choices, but if we really want this project to be all encapsulating of the awesome concepts we've learned over the past almost 3 months now, guys, how about we use an array to hold the value of the questions of one category and then the answers. So we're gonna have to make essentially 8 arrays, because quick math, we have 4 categories, which means we have 4 arrays of questions and then 4 arrays of answers to those questions. So let's get started. We're going to make our first question array for the NBA category. So I'm going to just call it NBA questions, like such. We set it equal to these brackets. And now, since these questions are a word, we can hold them in a string type format, so we can just put some quotation marks around them. Now, we need 4 different questions from increasing difficulty. So we got to start small. So for the first question, we can just go ahead and say, who wore number 23 for the Chicago Bulls in the 1990s? Pretty easy question if you are an avid NBA fan. Once we have our first question, and if you guys would like, you can simply just watch. I will drop these arrays in the chat or in the classroom if you just want to watch and get the concept, whatever you guys feel like doing. So that's the $100 question. The $250 question can be, who was, let's see, what can we go with? $250 question. Who was the player who went to the NBA Finals 9 years in a row? Now, the $500 question can be, let's see, how many seasons did the Los Angeles Lakers go without making the playoffs? Fun fact, they are in the playoffs right now. They yesterday lost against an 8th seed. So a number 1 seed lost against an 8th seed. If you haven't been watching, I would recommend watching the NBA bubble games. Pretty exciting. We got some sports going on again now. And then finally, we got one last question, that being the $1,000 question. Now, this should be a bit hard, so how about we ask, what can we ask? How about we ask, how many MVP awards does, let's see, how many does LeBron James have? All right, so now we got the questions for the NBA. We have to make the answers. So if we go back down here, I'm going to call it NBA answers, a second array. And now the first question's answer was, who wore number 23 for the Chicago Bulls during the 1990s? In case you did not watch the Last Dance documentary, which is totally awesome this past quarantine, the answer is Michael Jordan. The second question was asking, who was the player who went to the NBA Finals 9 years in a row? That is LeBron James. Third question, how many seasons did the Los Angeles Lakers go without making the playoffs? That is 10 seasons. Just a number, we'll put it as. And the last question is, how many MVP awards does LeBron James have? That is 4, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. All right, so there we go. I'm not going to do all 3 other categories today because that would take a lot of time and it'd get pretty boring for you guys. So I'm going to challenge you guys to personally go ahead, and if you do not want to do current events, NFL, Lord of the Rings, try to do your own categories. Try to fiddle around with it and make your own question and answers following a similar syntax of having an array for questions and an array for answers. So for today, we will just use these left 4 buttons as the NBA category, and next week we can actually create dividers and add some more categories. But for today, in terms of time preservation, we can go ahead and do some evaluation, aka some logic statements to see if the user was right. So we have the user clicking a button, but we have to display the question first before we can evaluate their response. So let's go right here. We have to use a logic statement to see which type of category button the user clicked on. So remember, we have our categories and our variables called button category and button value. So I'm going to do button category. So I'm going to check if the button category the user clicked in is the NBA. So then we can display the NBA questions. So I'm going to do if, open and close parentheses, button category equals the NBA. And then open and close squiggly brackets. So now this button is going to tell me whenever we click a button which pertains to the NBA category. However, now we have to do 4 more if statements to check which type of money the button is, how much money the button is worth. So let's do that. What we can do is say if the button value equals 100, open and close squiggly brackets, then we got to use our knowledge about the DOM, the document object model, to display the question. So remember that really long line of code? Here we go. So let's document dot get capital E element, capital B by capital ID, get element by ID, open and close parentheses, quotation marks for whatever we called our question display. I called mine question display. And then dot inner HTML equals. Now we got to display the actual question. Now remember, we were pretty smart about how we are going to display our question, that being using arrays. So since this is the first question worth $100, we have to access the first element in our array. So we can do is call our array NBA questions. Oh, if that might look a bit weird because it's splitting the lines, but it's still one word, guys, NBA questions. And then we're accessing the first element. So let's do a quick pop quiz right here. Who can remember how we access the first element in our array? Do we look at the 0th index or the number 1 index? Anybody have a guess? Is it a 0 or is it a 1? Do we need a slight refresher on our arrays, guys? DT says 1, okay. All right, so the correct answer is 0. Now, if you're at all confused and did not participate in our JavaScript courses over the summer, that is totally fine. The reason why the answer is 0 is because in an array, our array is formatted. So let me pull up a quick picture actually to visualize this better. So remember, in our array, we have a bunch of different values being held in our array. In this case, we have strings which are holding our questions. Now, the first element is always the 0th element in any computer programming language. So whether we're doing Python or JavaScript, that first element is always going to be accessed by us looking at the 0th element. And then the first, then the second, then the third, and so on. So if I go back over to our fiddle, so we're going to display the first question, that being the 0th element. And now what I can do is copy this if statement and paste it regarding whichever question the user clicks. So now remember, we can use something called an else if. So if it's not the $100 button, we can do is else if the button value equals 250, display the second element, aka the first index. Just copy and paste this else if. Else if the value of the button is worth $500, we display the second index. And then lastly, if the value is worth the whopping $1,000, we shall display the last item in our array, that being the third index. So now, guys, if we want to see if our project runs correctly, if I hit run and say I hit the $1,000 button, we should see the HTML manipulate, and we should see the question: how many MVP awards does LeBron James have? And if we click it, we do not see it. Well, let's see what happens. Let's see. let's see, guys. Give me one quick minute. This is always the process in computer programming. We are always debugging and checking whether we make a mistake. So if I log I believe it is something to do with the category of the button. Oh, I guess it did not compile. All right, so I guess we are fine. I think I did not hit the run button correctly. So never mind, guys. There we go. We see that if I click the $100 question, we're displayed with the first $100 question. If I click the second button, we see the second, third, and so on. All of those questions. Like that. I forgot 1,000. So if I click 1,000 now, we see the correct question being asked to us. Now for today, guys, within these last couple of 5-10 minutes, how about we do some evaluation of whether our question was correct, and then we can start implementing that to our project next week even further. So we are able to ask the user a certain question, but we're not really evaluating a user response. So if the user types in anything, we're not getting anything, right? Well, oh, that just refreshed. So that or not, don't confuse that. We are still not evaluating the response. So now, remember the submit button we made? Yes, the link to this fiddle will be posted on our Google Classroom. If you've not already joined, the code is QAF7IBG. I will drop it in the chat as well, because that is where we communicate with you guys and all that good stuff. So here you go. So now we have to actually evaluate our user's response. So this is a separate function, but first we have to actually get the user response. So how about we hold it in a variable? We'll call it var hold user. We'll just call it user answer. And now here comes a really long line of code. We go document dot get capital E element capital B by capital ID. Open and close parentheses with the quotation marks, and then this is where we have to grab the user input. So whatever ID you put for your text field, we drop in, copy and paste that right here, and then we just do dot value, like such. And if you want, we can even alert this to see that our function is working properly. So if I type in hello, we should see the word hello being alerted. And voila, there we go. Now for today, guys, we have done a lot of coding, obviously in our JavaScript file and our HTML file, making our game much more concrete, displaying the question. So one last part of today is to actually evaluate the user's response, and then we can talk about it next week. So I have the two arrays, NBA answers and NBA questions, but they're inside of the function question clicked, meaning they're a local variable, meaning I can't access them in my submit function. What do we got to do to change that? If you thought make these global variables, you are 100% correct. So what I can do is copy these two arrays, go outside of my function, and then paste them outside. This way I can access these two arrays wherever and whenever I want in my function, in my JavaScript file. All right, so now that we have our arrays in a global variable format, we can access them anywhere. So what we gotta do, guys, 1 second. All right, now here comes the evaluation part. For today, guys, we're just gonna do one if statement, and then we'll see next week. And I'm going to give you guys a quick assignment to do on an extension for this Jeopardy game. So if we do if the user answer equals our NBA answers array at the 0th index, meaning we're checking if the value which the user entered is the first answer. And then how about we just do a quick alert for now and say that you are correct. If I run this, $100 question, Hoover 23 for Michael Jordan. If I put the right answer in, we should see an alert or correct. So that is pretty much it for this week. We have done a lot. I do not want to cram a lot into today's lesson. We had covered a lot in terms of asking the user a question, creating an array with questions and answers for our number 1 category, that being the NBA. Next week, we can create the other 3 category arrays, along with doing more with the evaluation part of checking what if the user is correct, if they're incorrect, displaying some more statistics, such as the amount of money they have, but not only that, such as the number of questions the user has gotten right, the number they got wrong, and all that good stuff and more. One second. All right, so guys, for next week, we always talk about what we're going to do next week. And in this case, for next week, we're going to be finishing our Jeopardy game with all of the evaluation, looking at different categories and answers. And then we can even explore some CSS in terms of making our project look nicer. So that if you'd like, show it off to your friends, family, whoever you'd like, and so that everybody can enjoy it. That's one of the most important things about programming, guys. And the most cool thing about programming is that you can show off and show to other people what you made and allow others to have some fun with you as well. And then probably not next week, because I envision that we are going to be taking the whole period for our Jeopardy game and the whole finishing of that. But the week after, a quick sneak peek, we are going to be starting a new project, that being the calculator project. As always, guys, we will be going through all this together, and all of the code which we did today can be found on our Google Classroom. And if you ever want to go back to a certain part I was talking about, this video will be up shortly on the Schaumburg Library's YouTube channel, and it can be found under the Tech Bytes playlist. As always, hope you guys enjoyed. Hopefully learned something new with the fun fact of the day, or with just us coding our fun game of Jeopardy. And as always, guys, take care. Ask any questions in the classroom, and I'll catch you guys next week. See ya. No problem. See you guys. Take care.